fits all approach. True advantage comes from differentiation. I
Mm.
should get the applause thing out for that one. That's a really key concept, right?
Yeah, and you set aside custom development for a minute, even though I know that's what we're going to focus on here today. But if we just think about IT and applications and technology in general, I mean, why are we doing this? I mean, are we doing this to are we going through the pain and heartache of an implementation just so we can spend a bunch of money that's unused in our budget? Or are we doing it because we want to create some sort of competitive advantage? And I think we've lost sight of that in the IT industry in general. I think it's become more of a money pit. Like it's a must have. I just have to invest in IT because I have to be in the cloud. Well, okay, you've got to be in the cloud, or you've got to go SaaS, or you've got to go commercial off the shelf. Why? Like, what's the point? Or, what's the purpose of what you're trying to accomplish? And the same is true for custom dev too. I mean, there's cases where custom development is going to be a better enabler of competitive advantage, because if you think about it, if I go buy SAP S4 HANA, yeah, sure, they can claim all they want that they've got best practices in there, but let's just assume that they're right. They do have best practices. Well, now all my competitors have access to those same best practices. So how am I any different? If I'm using the same product that others are using. So custom dev is really the only option that gives you a true competitive advantage, in my opinion. I mean, others do to a lesser degree, but custom dev is like the utopia of creating competitive advantage. Now, there's a lot of dark side risks to it, but there is definitely an upside that oftentimes gets overlooked.
Indeed, and that philosophy of IT as a differentiator is, I think, really, really important, because a lot of shops haven't had that mentality over the years, even if they do have developers on site. And one of the things I think is important too, and I don't think we'll get into this in detail, but in my work, I do see companies that are running ERP in what I would consider something of a differentiated way. Uh, I don't think just because every company is running on an SAP or an Oracle, they're running it effectively, right? But
Right.
a lot of times what I see from that is the differentiations from that are either things around automation and efficiency, which is sort of a cost savings thing in a way, operational efficiency, or there's some differentiation that happens around what you do with the data and how you make decisions around that data. And that's cool, but that's not the same as new business models, right?
Mm-hmm.
That's not the same as building kick-ass apps for your customers. That's
Yeah.
there's I think I could make an argument, Eric, that you can have operational efficiency higher than your peers running the same software that they do, but it's hard for me to say that you're differentiating in terms of your value in the market, because I think that comes from your unique products, your unique services, and I think that's where your post really is getting at.
Yeah, and I would just maybe add a spin to what you just said. I mean, if you're saying that I'm an organization and I'm running SAP or Oracle, whatever it is, I'm running this system more efficiently, more effectively than my competitors. I interpret that, maybe this is the jaded part of me, but I interpret that as I didn't screw it up as bad as my competitors did. My competitors all
Fair
screwed up and they
enough.
failed in their implementation. So I happen to succeed. So therefore I have a competitive advantage. To me, that seems like in my opinion, if you look at failure rates of digital
Right.
transformations in general, that's a
Yep.
high risk
Oh, for
proposition.
sure.
So,
For
but
sure. Yeah, 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 right. You may be damning with faint praise in a sense by saying that. I just wanted to point out that I don't think it's all that easy to
yeah,
effectively run those systems, and that effectively running them actually can help you. But I think it just gives you a baseline of opportunity to then kick ass in your industry and in your business. It doesn't guarantee that you will, right?
right.
And none of those vendors are claiming that they do that. I mean, that's not what they're designed to do.
Yeah.
Anyhow, so back to your post. We're gonna sort of start at the top, and you outlined four major digital strategy options: single ERP systems, best of breed solutions, software platforms, and custom development. And you talk about how the first three options dominate most enterprise discussions, and I want to get to that point in a sec. But one thing I did want to say is, I think in the large enterprise, if you make smart decisions about your quote unquote ERP or operational system, whatever, that it's really a combination of the first three. What I like to see is customers choosing a go-to application platform. So essentially they're choosing an ecosystem and a community
Yeah.
around that. And they might have one or two best of breed components, and in that case they expect easier integration interoperability in a way that hasn't been promised in the past. So in other words, I'm pretty jaded about a best of breed environment, and I'm pretty jaded about a one size fits all ERP environment or a different platform. I like the combination of that, and I think the smartest companies are leaning in that direction.
Yeah.
Now, vendors don't always accommodate that and make it easy, right? We still don't see many examples of vendors, for example, showcasing, oh, I'm an ERP vendor. Here's how you easily integrate Salesforce, because they have their own CRM thing going on. They don't want to, so you still don't see enough of that, like we play nice with others kind of vibe. But I think ultimately, Eric, in my opinion, that's what customers expect is they want, because we've learned the hard way that just assembling a bunch of best of breed components in the end and trying to make those work is a failed strategy. I don't care. You can talk about APIs and seamless integration all day long. Anyway, I think your three options still make sense, but I like them best mixed up a little bit.
Oh, I totally agree. And I don't think any organization should be focused just on any one of those. I mean, if you're focused on one, you're probably being a bit myopic and not looking at, the full spectrum of options, and you're probably not going to get as much of a ROI on it if you're just focused on one of those. But finding the right mix, that's the tricky part, because you might use ERP. ERP is great at, back office, financials and inventory management and stuff like that. But ERP is not good at, advanced planning and some of the more customer facing type stuff, e-commerce, all that stuff. So you figure, okay, well, that doesn't mean you abandon the ERP model, but you rethink how you view ERP, and you don't necessarily subscribe to the vendor's view of how you should be using ERP. Because to your point, they want you to use everything. And they say that's, single source of truth. You need one single system. That sounds much better in theory than it is in practicality.
Right. And so part of your job is to help customers have a broader window into what those options really look like, instead of getting kind of railroaded down one.
Yeah. Yeah. And so much of it depends on the type of company you're talking about too.
Right.
Like if you're, think about like Amazon or Uber, Lyft, some of these just totally transformative businesses that it's not about they were true digital transformations, but they did more than that. They created a whole new business model based on technology. So Amazon and Uber did not go out and become successful by implementing SAP. I mean, that wasn't their core strategy. The core strategy was to build a better app, a better mousetrap, invest in their own technology that's really hard to replicate, and it creates a higher barrier of entry. It comes with it, cost and maintenance and risk and all that stuff, of course. But I think that's important to recognize.
So Jason wants to ask about the context of the analytics platform and all of that. And before you answer that, Eric, I'm just going to frame that a little bit. And Tony, I want to get you on the video for your reward for being awake here. So 11, 15 and counting there for you. And Clive, welcome as well. So just real quick on that front, I think more and more companies need to think about these software investments in the context of a data platform and analytics strategy. That's always been the case, I think, for smart companies, but now I think you really have to be thinking about all of that at the same time, because your board wants answers for you in terms of what your AI strategy is and stuff like this, and you're going to have to be ready for that. And so in that context, I think we could have another blog post, Eric, about those decisions. I think it's almost like a whole separate show in a way, because there's a delicate balance between what your current vendor that you're consuming ERP from can do from you from an analytics standpoint in terms of embedded analytics and things like that, versus third parties you might turn to, versus your own AI approaches. There's a lot of different things, but more and more, I think companies are going to want to be able to say, we have a data strategy that allows us all kinds of options with AI and analytics, right?
Yeah. Yeah. And you bring up a great point, because, Jason brings up a great point too in his initial question, but I think that's why if you look at Snowflake and Palantir, I think those are two examples of companies that are taken off, in terms of the market valuation and just their traction in the industry, because they're recognizing the importance of analytics and data, and also they're recognizing the difficulty of ripping out legacy systems, and they're sort of pouncing on that, saying, hey, we've got a solution here that allows you to, if you want to keep running your old legacy systems, and keep running them, we don't care. Our system can help you get the analytics and data and the workflows that you need out of a more consolidated feeling system.
Yep. So there's a lot of ways you could approach it, right? Because you could have an analytics driven transformation and keep a lot of your legacy operating systems intact for now. But there's downsides to that too. And when you have custom development landscapes, you're going to find that AI projects are more difficult, for example. So, anyway, there's a lot of nuances to that. But Jason, I think part of your question requires a whole separate show to really satisfactorily answer it. Clive says your 1, 2, 3, 4 post is practical analysis from a buyer's customer point of view. Vendors can accommodate SaaS customization a lot better now. Salesforce broke the mold in CRM. We will see who will in ERP. Some ERP vendors obviously historically have done that on premise. One thing I want to hit on right now is I think we need to hit on some definitions, because customization versus custom development are slightly different topics. I think we can address, or they can be very different topics, actually. I think we should address both of them today.
Yeah.
I think what we'll do is we'll set customization aside for a little bit. Customizing existing software is a big can of worms and an interesting discussion also. But I would argue that for the most part, you're not going to get true differentiation from that. A lot of that is about accommodating user needs and demands, or also specific processes that you're trying to unique. And look, some people may have really unique, interesting processes, but I would say for the most part, you don't differentiate between having a better accounts payable process. Stay the hell out of the accounts payable customization. And also in the context, Clive, I would also argue to you that there's other elements of SaaS customization, because there's configuration, and some SaaS solutions have gotten very sophisticated in their functional configuration where you don't need to customize. And then there's also extensibility, which I tend to prefer, which is where you build applications on the same platform using extensible frameworks. I don't think that's true differentiation the way Eric was describing in his blog, but it can maybe fill a gap, like building software. One example that comes to mind is a company that built on a SuccessFactors platform, built a partner built labor union management software that didn't exist in the core. But that was an extensibility thing. That wasn't core customization. But anyway, customization, kind of a separate topic, Eric. Can we set that one aside for a little bit and return to it?
Yeah, that sounds good.
Okay.
Yeah.
So let's talk about custom development then, in the context of like where you might be doing custom software development that would interface with this landscape you described, but probably through things like API calls and things like that, right?
Yeah.
The main thing you might need from that landscape would be data, right?
Right.
So, okay. So tell us about like what you've been dealing with in terms of the pros and cons. So when a customer is trying to weigh these options, including custom development, like you kind of listed some of the challenges in your blog, but how do you go through this pros and cons discussion with a customer?
Yeah, I mean, first is as is the case with any of the 4 major options we talk about, that we're talking about here, between commercial off-the-shelf software, platform customization, and I forgot what the other one was, but or best of breed was the 4th one.
Yep.
In all 4 of these, there's distinct pros and cons, but there's a lot of purists out there, at the CIO level, consultant level. I mean, just in the tech industry in general, there's a lot of purists that believe whatever they believe. Some believe custom dev is awesome. It's all about custom dev. Some believe I hate custom dev. I just want one size fits all ERP system. Some want a best of breed, somewhere in between. So I think the first thing with custom dev is taking away the bias that people have towards custom dev. Because I think now in the last 10 years, especially, I feel like custom dev just has at least with our clients, and keep in mind, I've got a limited sample. We work with hundreds of clients throughout the world, but there's a lot more that we don't work with. So just based on customers that come to us, most of them have a negative bias towards custom development. And part of it is, partially because they've been burned by it in the past. And back to your earlier point, I know we're setting aside customization, but customization gone wrong leads you to be allergic to it. You're allergic to any sort of custom anything going forward to a fault. A lot of CIOs sort of do a pendulum swing back to the other extreme and say, we just want off-the-shelf system, vanilla. And it's not realistic for a big, complex company. So anyway, to your question, it's about removing those biases and just looking at a balance. Like, no matter which of these 4 buckets you look at, there are distinct trade-offs. And I don't have a strong opinion as a generalization. I don't have a strong opinion on which one's the best. I think you've got to look at the client situation. And even for one client, I may not have a strong opinion, or our team may not have a strong opinion. It may be, to your point earlier, a mix and match, and what's the right recipe for this particular client. So you have to get them out of the bias. You have to get them out of their own, certainly the vendor community doesn't help, especially the big ERP vendors that are all anti-custom dev, unless it's
Right.
They're not against you customizing their software, of course, but they're against custom dev. So I think it's you just sort of have to cut through the noise and say, hey, yeah, custom dev isn't always ideal. In fact, I wouldn't recommend building an entire end-to-end system from the ground up, because you don't need to. But there might be some select areas in your business where it makes a lot of sense and it can actually deliver a ton of value potentially. So that's the way we view it with our clients.
Yeah, I mean, it seems like any kind of, when you have custom dev things that get you closer to your customers, that build smarter products, or that create new ways of managing your suppliers and your supply chain, that's when the light bulbs start going off for me of like, yeah, let's take a look at this, right?
Yeah. Yeah. And one thing you said that's really interesting that has my wheels turning is, there's this hybrid platform custom dev concept. I think is really powerful. Actually, Clive mentioned Salesforce, and that's what sort of triggered it as well. Is, Salesforce is a lot more flexible than some other SaaS systems out there if you want to customize the software. But what I really like about companies like Salesforce, they're not the only one, but companies like Salesforce are creating complete platforms you can build on. Microsoft Dynamics has been this way for a while too, where you've got third-party developers that can come in and create extensions or complete industry tailoring of the solution, or just some sort of, just some sort of one-off custom solution. And it allows customers to write their own code and do some custom dev, but in a platform with a common tool set that integrates with the core systems they're using. So I like that platform concept. I think that's an emerging area that I think is going to take off, because it kind of gives you the best of really all worlds. It gives you the best of commercial off the shelf ERP type functionality. It gives you some level of customization. It gives you some level of best of breed, but it's all within a common platform. So it sort of gives you that integrated feel.
I want to get back to that one in just a sec, because I have an anecdote about that from a recent show. But you have another section that's, I think, really important to put out there, which is when custom development is the right choice. And you have 4 factors.
Mm-hmm.
Your business model requires it. In other words, industries that have highly specialized processes that ERP or best of breed can't really accommodate. The second one, which I really like, is you have a unique competitive edge, which could include things like unique data models or proprietary algorithms. No existing solution fits. And then your fourth one, which I think is important, is AI and automation are changing the game. AI-powered tools are making it easier than ever to develop custom application without deep coding knowledge, and I do agree with that. The only thing I will say is around the AI part is I do think that companies that move into their own AI-driven development need to be very sophisticated at this point, because there's a risk management around AI that is much more significant. And that's where I think you're developing on a vendor's platform thing starts to make more sense to me around things like that, because I think most companies need an intermediary in AI to take away some of the liabilities from dealing with that, but not all. If you're sophisticated, then I'm fine. If you got a great team of lawyers, there's IP lawsuits working their way through court right now, for example. These are things that you have to think about if you're going to use these tools from scratch. So I just wanted to point out that I think AI brings some challenges there, but what's really interesting is how you can rethink some of these premises. Like I went to a show recently. I can't reveal all of it because this part was a little bit NDA, but it was a vertical solutions thing, and I'm fascinated by this whole notion of industry, like rethinking industries, right? Because I think that's ultimately what the message behind AI and automation is about, is rethinking how you can compete in your particular industry, not like some chat GPT, like, oh, this is a great Copilot for me. Like, okay, fine, it's helping you to write an email, whatever. Rethinking your industry and how you can compete in that industry, I think, is where the action is in the enterprise. And so I went to a show where I was shown, it was an automotive value chain kind of thing. And the customer had built it almost entirely with low code, no code tools. Like there was very little coding involved. And like you said, because it was built on the vendor's application and data platform, they're able to pull data from relevant applications, and then they have the benefits of that entire environment being updated and maintained by the vendor. So that doesn't mean that they never have to maintain that app that they built. And probably if I dug into it, I'd find out that their developers had to modify a little bit of the code, right? I don't think that business users like built the whole thing, but I was really impressed by that, Eric, because that's different than classic custom development projects back in the day when you and I were cutting our teeth in that business, right? Where it was about gathering requirements and building and these iterations and like this idea of the business user charting it out and building it out based on their domain knowledge. That to me, that's exciting. Like that's different. And I don't get excited that often because I'm pretty jaded, but I thought that was cool.
Yeah, that's super cool. And I think you will see more of that. I mean, I know, there's a lot. I mean, all the vendors, it's one of those buzzwords right now, the low code, no code concept. And a lot of vendors are saying, hey, we've got this low code, no code thing. When in reality, a lot of them are just offering the same configuration options that they've always had, so that's technically low code, no code if you're not customizing. If you're
right.
But you're
low code washing or whatever.
Yeah. But, some vendors like, do as an example in the ERP space, and certainly there's others as well, where they've got a true low code sort of platform, or Rapid. I don't know if you know Jan Bond, the guy that founded Bond Software. He's got a company now called Rapid, which is like a low code development platform. So there's just really cool companies like that are, you're right. It's just making you rethink the whole customization, the custom development thing. And I think that's why we have to sort of rethink it. I think it's sort of gone through a cycle here where it's had such a negative connotation for so long that I feel like it might make an emergence now when you look at all the stuff we're talking about, low code platforms. We'll get into AI and how that affects custom development too, I assume. So there's these different trends that are happening right now that actually make custom development appealing potentially for some once again.
Right. So quick thing from Clive here. We should look at Amazon Prime, whose customer-facing order management is actually a composite of about 80 servers. Amazon customers don't see how this SaaS is seamlessly sewn together. We should see ERP adopt this common platform approach, avoid the pitfalls of on-prem customization. And I really like that direction, Clive. Keep the comments coming on this. I like that direction overall because I think like peeling apart these new stack players, right? Like figuring out how the Netflix and Amazons of the world built their stack, I think is really powerful. The only thing I would say, Clive, is that you have to be a little careful because a lot of companies don't have the resources that Amazon had to do that. And I think that's where these kind of building block approaches that we're starting to talk about now are so important, right, Eric? Because you have to find a way to kind of make a slightly more level playing field there than Amazon's world-class like logistics and customer service network, right? Like, because I think that's too high a bar for most companies, but the model could still be learned from,
Yeah. Well, think about all these companies that you and I and others listening in here today. Think about all these big implementations, $50, $100 million implementations. So companies are spending a lot of money on tech, and a lot of that money is going to waste. So just imagine if you sort of redirected that. Maybe you're not completely overhauling your entire business model, like, or recreating a new business model like Amazon did, but you could take part of your business. Maybe it's more like you said, the customer facing or the product side of things, and rethink that piece of your business model and target your spending dollars on developing something that really gives you a killer app or a killer unique way of doing business. And especially, and if it saves you from having to, if you redirect that 50 or 100 million or however much you're going to spend on ERP and apply it towards something like that, I mean, that's probably not too high of a bar for a lot of companies to go through. I mean, how much wasted money have you seen in this industry for the last 20 to 30 years that you've been doing this? I mean, just imagine what that number is if you could quantify it somehow. I mean, that's a lot of money that's been wasted.
Right. And so one of your core pieces of argument that we get to now is custom development kind of making a comeback. So, we've had this trend towards standardization around ERP, and then arguably even more with SaaS. Now, I think SaaS companies and vendors, the good ones, have been able to move a little bit further away from that with that combination of deeper config, extensibility, but still, it's a platform. It's a standardization exercise, right? And that's a big part of how you accrue some operational efficiencies. But as we discussed, that's not the same as differentiation. So now you're kind of saying, which is really interesting, can AI and automation help bring this conversation back and make it more realistic for more shops to do this? And I would argue not just custom development more efficiently, but in a way that is easier to maintain, right? Because one of the benefits of these sort of building block approaches is that when a developer leaves, they're not taking all that mind share of how they coded everything with them, right? So walk us through a little bit how AI and automation could maybe be fueling this custom development comeback.
Well, it certainly cuts down, quite a bit of the labor time with developing that code from scratch. But I think that's only scratching the surface of where AI can help. I mean, it certainly does make it suddenly not quite as cumbersome to create an app or a custom app, but it's not just the initial build, it's also the testing. It's the, test cycles now can be sped up because AI, you can use AI to help speed up some of those test cycles. You still have, you're always going to have the human user adoption piece of it, which is always going to be the challenge no matter which of these options you look at. But in some cases, custom development might mitigate some of that because you're able to create exactly what you want versus all the other options require some sort of compromise. But I think, I think AI I don't know. I haven't seen any numbers. I'm sure they're out there, numbers that quantify what the savings might be in terms of time saved or percentage savings on custom development time. But I've got to think it's astronomical. I mean, I imagine time now is just a fraction of what it used to be to develop. I'm not a developer, right? And I have not tried, to be clear, I've not tried AI yet to develop any custom code. So I can't speak from experience, but just based on everything we're seeing in some of these tools out there that are being used to develop software, I've got to think it's creating lower barriers to entry and making it a lot more efficient and cost effective to do.
At Zoho, we talked about how AI code efficiencies is a work in progress because there's a lot of integration that still needs to be done with code compilers. And there's a lot of quality checking and auditing of that code that needs to happen. But the good news is that AI is going to be better at that than it is at quality control with human language output, which is much more subjective in code as a structure and a syntax. So there is a lot there, but I think one of the keys is that this isn't new. Like with a lot of LLM areas, optimizing that is new, but actually automating code has been a discipline for a long time now. AI is just the latest in that. And so I think that's why we're seeing some real possibilities here. Is this isn't just like AI generated code. This is a whole series of building blocks that vendors have been constructing, and AI actually fits pretty nicely into the framework. It doesn't necessarily replace low code or no code. It can complement it and extend it, which I think is what makes it all powerful. Anyway, a couple of good ones here. Tony says, we're a small startup, 180 ops. We built our architecture on Kubernetes, very automated, scalable, and secure. Even startups can have Spotify, Netflix level capabilities. And I think that's a really good example of what we're talking about here. Now, granted, I might take issue a little bit with that Spotify, Netflix, Tony, but personalization at scale the way Netflix has done it, I'm going to maybe have to see that you can do that. But I think your point still stands, right, which is you can do a lot of the things that sophisticated companies can do based on that kind of architecture, which is really cool. And looking forward to hearing more about how it is you guys do that. And the beauty of a startup, too, is that you can do it without some of the compliance and security and role-based BS that slows down a lot of enterprise development rollouts, where there's so many considerations around all of that stuff before you can put anything in play. Jason says on the spectrum of customization and debt accumulation, and we haven't talked about the fact that technical debt is obviously part of the downsides here. Mm-hmm. Where do you place a microservices architecture such as Rapid? So microservices, which you have blogged on in the past as well, where do we put that?
Yeah, I think, microservices kind of reminds me of another hybrid approach where it's, it does give you a certain amount of flexibility, and you could argue it's creating a certain amount of technical debt, but by whose standards? I think technical debt it's one of those terms I just don't like that much. I know we all use it. I use it, but I cringe a little bit every time I say or hear the word technical debt, because to me it's it's a very loaded word that's got a very strong marketing intent, which is the word debt. Most of us have a negative connotation. We think of debt. We think, oh, I have to pay that off. I have to. I have no choice. The reality is you can stay on an old system all you want. I mean, we've got clients that are still trying to figure out how to move off their AS400 or their I-Series. So, it's not a terrible thing. It's held them back from growth in some areas, perhaps. Now they're having to pay for it by catching up, but it got them so much value, and they milked those assets. It's like the utilities concept of sweating the assets. They got as much possible ROI out of those investments as they could. So to me, tech debt is a little bit of a loaded term, but what I'd say though is that microservices, and the same could be said for the platform concept that we're talking about, is that if you're doing this all in a common tool set in a fairly mainstream platform or architecture, then it's, you're mitigating some of that risk. Now, obviously a company like Rapid or any other vendor out there 10 or 20 years from now, they might be obsolete, who knows? But that's also true for SAP. It's also true for, all the custom off the shelf systems. I'll be curious to see like how the vendor landscape shakes up here in the next decade, because I think it's going to change significantly. We've seen it in history, and I think AI and all this other stuff that's emerging is going to totally screw up the incumbents, lock on the market right now.
Yeah, I think the only thing where the incumbents kind of got lucky with AI is that there's such a data imperative to get a good result out of AI right now that companies sitting on massive amounts of data, and also with the resources to invest in big AI infrastructure, do have, I would say, something of an incumbent's advantage. And you can see that from their stock market, how the big enterprise software vendors are faring in the stock market. But like you said, that doesn't make them invulnerable to these things. It just, the way I argue is that they have an opportunity to retain their status as an incumbent.
That's a great point.
But they might not make it. And like you said, I think we're going to see some fade and some are going to excel. And right now we don't really know which ones, because everyone's got, the same shiny slide deck about how great they are and how awesome their AI is. But we will find out over time. And I would not be shocked to see, one or two significant new players emerge in all of this. And, in all honesty, what I prefer to see instead of another big horizontal player is I'd like to see more vertical specific plays, because I really think that's the future, is taking on an industry and saying we're gonna create the best retail like application platform you could possibly have, or whatever it is. But anyway, we'll see if that pans out.
Or functions like what Salesforce and Workday have done. They've picked off. They're not trying to be everything to everyone. They sort of have picked off unique. Now over time they are trying to be everything to everyone, but they became successful by doing CRM in Salesforce's case, or HCM and Workday.
And they will still tell you, those vendors will still tell you about the areas that they're not going into. And I think that's a strength. Tony gets to the heart of it here with the buy versus build. How would you define which pieces of the puzzle to buy and which factors lean towards building?
Yeah, I think the buy, you kind of hit on it in passing earlier in this conversation. You talked about how AP, as an example, AP is an area you don't want to touch if you can help it. There's no reason you should be customizing your AP process. It doesn't give you any sort of competitive advantage to pay your vendors faster. So why make it more complicated than it needs to be? So I'd say that's a way to look at it, as you look at the commodity processes versus your competitive processes. And it's hard to have that conversation internally as an organization, because you're inherently maybe implying that part of the business is not as important as the other. And that's not the message. The message is, if we do AP, or if we do inventory management, or even AR, general accounting, stuff like that, everyone's sort of, accounting, for example, in the US, you've got GAAP rules. There's a certain way you do accounting, and it's not, you don't want to get too creative and too cute or fancy with your accounting practices, but you might want to get cute and fancy with some of your the way customers interact with you, or access information, or the way you service those customers. That's where you think about the build options. I would say though, I do think that if you can buy, then great. If a buying gives you what you need and what you're looking for, then by all means buy. But the problem is most organizations can't buy everything they need. There's some aspect that falls short. And that's the big question is then, okay, let's say it's not realistic for us to buy and use that software off the shelf. Then our options are, do we customize that existing software? Do we custom dev? Do we go get a best of breed bolt on? Or do we just force the organization to suck it up and just water down the process and figure out how to use the software the way it was built. I mean, those are kind of your 3 or 4 options if and when you run into a roadblock with the build option, or I'm sorry, with the buy option.
Yeah, for sure. And I think Tony's question is the kind of question that I prefer to see customers discussing with someone who is independent of the projects that are going to ensue, because too often if there isn't an independent expert in that industry to advise on buy versus build, I think you can run into some real problems doing business with vendors that are more than happy to provide you with all kinds of options to do custom or out of the box, whatever it is on their platform with their applications.
Right.
And that might not be the best for you. So much of it, I think, is that the best companies make these decisions around how they're going to compete or how they're going to transform independently of their software footprint. And then they proceed into the software decisions. And I really want to see more companies like that. And when I go to shows, I would say only a very small percentage fit that description. But you can always tell when you run into one, because when you talk to their employees, even the employees are able to articulate, here's how we're transforming, here's how we compete, here's what our best customer looks like, here's how we're different. And that's a rare conversation for me to have, Eric.
Mm-hmm.
I don't have those very often.
Yeah. That's hard to have because everyone's got, most of the industry has a bias of some sort based on who they work for and what product they're trying to peddle. So that's the beauty. You're right. That's the beauty of having I don't think true trusted advisors should be affiliated with the software vendor, because how could you be a trusted advisor at the same time you're trying to sell a product? It just doesn't quite
And the
work.
decision is important enough that I think there's a role for a trusted third party outside experts during that, because Tony's kind of cut to the chase, because once you make that decision, I think it's a fairly fateful decision. And I would say it's not just buy versus build. It's buy versus build in the context of how you're going to evolve as an organization over time.
Mm-hmm.
And like you said, you don't totally like that technical debt word, but there is this thing around how are you going to maintain your footprint? How are you going to build on it? And how are you going to be successful in the long term? And I think having those answers is really important. So we're now sort of moving into the customization questions, and that was kind of the conversation we put off. So I just really want to just make a conscious point here that we're shifting gears from a custom development conversation. And Eric, you made the point in your post that ultimately it's about finding the right balance between the stuff you buy and the stuff you build. But I do think you've succeeded in making a good argument that there are reasons why custom development needs another fresh look, and with the new tooling available to make it more within the reach, as Tony points out, within the reach of more customers. I think that's all great. But now we have this customization piece. Now, customization, I think, as a whole, we could spend a whole show on it, so it may not be totally satisfying to the audience members because we spent time on other topics. But it's a complicated topic, and I think one of the reasons why it's complicated is because historically there was an on-premise ERP customization business with, I think, a lot of ecosystem partners that were more than happy to take on the work without really pushing back on customers. And so all I would say is all customization is not created equal. And some ERP customizations were really valuable and smart. Some of them, frankly, were really self-indulgent and stupid. A lot of consulting partners need to really shift how they serve customers in that regard. And that's a big, big part of that conversation. Now, Jason, you wanted to get into SAP. In my particular show, I really don't spend a lot of time on particular vendors. And I'm not sure why we would single out SAP, to be honest with you, over other vendors with legacy footprints. So with your understanding, Jason, I'm going to expand that question. You know that I write a lot about SAP, so it's not that I don't do it. It's just that I really want to have a show that isn't about reacting to vendors and vendor situations, because there's so many LinkedIn shows about this stuff. So anyway, but this notion of how customization impacts legacy ERP install bases in a broader sense is a conundrum, right, Eric? Because it's difficult to serve a vast customer base that has made a wide range of decisions. So how does that play out for vendors?
It's just a tangled mess that's hard to untangle, and that's why I do think cloud adoption for not just SAP, to your point, it's other vendors too. I think Oracle's having the same problem to some degree. Microsoft's having the same problem to some degree. SAP gets a lot of attention just because it's a big, it's the big behemoth. It's big Fortune 500 companies that are even more entrenched in their custom code and stuff like that. So it might be a little exaggerated in their customer base, but still, the theme is the same across the vendor community. At least the incumbent on-prem vendors have this problem where, if I customize 10 or 20% of the product 20 years ago when I implemented it, how the hell am I going to untangle that? I can't just bring the code over to the cloud solution that they're trying to get me to upgrade to, or that I want to upgrade to. I've got to figure out how I'm going to take what was built to be exactly what I wanted. Now I've got to go to a SaaS or a cloud solution that has a little less flexibility than what I had on-prem, and I lost that code as well. So I think that's the daunting task, and I think he brings up a really good point. That is a big part of why we hear customers that are nervous about, especially the vendors, which are, again, multiple ones, not just SAP, but the ones that have these deadlines, like you need to upgrade to our cloud solution or else we'll stop supporting your on-prem. That's why so many of them are panicked. And that's why I think the software vendors are shooting themselves in the foot long-term, and they're burning up a lot of goodwill. Because there's a lot of angry customers out there. I don't know if the vendors fully realize that, but there's a lot of pissed off, frustrated customers that are wondering why the hell are these companies telling us how to run our business or telling us what timeline we need to be on to spend millions or tens of millions, maybe even hundreds of millions of dollars for some of these bigger companies. So it's it's a whole nother conversation, a whole nother show we could do about the reckless behavior of software vendors. But I think that is a big problem they're having is they're forcing these companies that have all this customization. And it's proven by the fact that so few of these companies have actually made the move. And it's not because they necessarily just don't want to. It's because of Jason's point. It's because of all that customization. How do we untangle it? And they don't know. They don't know how to untangle it.
Eric, I think you're right too to speak to the anger. I think there is a lot of anger on this topic, and that's not an exaggeration. I've seen it too, and I've been surprised by the intensity of it. And it's a complicated situation because I still do criticize a lot of customers in their decisions and how they made those, but the fact remains they did invest in a platform. It might have been through a consulting partner or an SI, but they still invested in a platform, right? Mm-hmm. And then when they're told that environment is either no longer being supported, or alternately they're told that you're not going to get these latest innovations for whatever reason, right? And when I dig into this, I find it's about half and half there, in the sense that a lot of times, yes, it is a lot harder to deliver quote unquote AI to a heavily customized environment, but it's also not impossible in a lot of cases. And so it's kind of a mixed bag. Like, vendors aren't lying about that. They're telling the truth, but I can think of some LLM vendors that will go right into your shop today and happily integrate with your on-premise systems. Now, I don't necessarily recommend that you do that because, again, you're going along with this thing around like, well, this is what I want. And I think what customers ultimately need is a much healthier dialogue with experts who are not invested in their future business to say, here's the customizations you really want to keep. Here's the ones you want to transition out of. But here's the good news. You can do this over time, on your own time, and get to a more standard landscape in a way that's manageable for you, that doesn't feel like a massive shock to your system. And unfortunately, Eric, I just don't think we're having a lot of those kinds of conversations.
No, we're not. And it's unfortunate, but they need to happen. I mean, if the vendors truly want to get customers onto their flagship new solutions, they're going to have to address it.
So we have some good comments. Customization, or Jason says, as customization or custom dev grows in ERP, you either have a governance issue or you select the wrong ERP. Governance is clearly a big thing, and when you get into custom dev, you still need that governance framework for a variety of reasons, right? You're never going to get away from that.
Yeah. It's also, and it kind of falls within governance a little bit, but it's also a change management issue, because a lot of times it's, to your point, you mentioned this earlier, John, that if a customer says, hey, I want to change the software because I want it to do A, B, and C, and you don't do it the way it was built off the shelf, then okay, I'll customize it. And so that's a change. That could be a change management issue. Now, in some cases, there are some cases where the build concept makes sense because it's a competitive area. But it seems like most customization that clients undergo is not necessarily. I mean, and it ends up being a slippery slope too. It's like, well, because I can change the software, I will. And it's so to Jason's point, yeah, you need good project governance and you also need good change management to kind of help people through the change where it makes sense. You don't want to force the software where it doesn't make sense, but if there is an alternate solution to use the buy option as a starting point, then by all means do it, but you've got to invest in more in change management and governance.
Yeah, and it's really interesting too because we haven't even gotten into this whole conversation around like there's some fantasies and some bullshit I would argue right now around like using AI to like build your own ERP,
Mm-hmm.
and that frankly that's just not possible with the current AI that exists today. I've looked into it, but there is hype around it, and look, it's certainly possible I think to generate code that you could use, to build your WordPress site if that makes you happy. But you can't run a major enterprise business on a WordPress platform last time I checked. But it does raise an important point though, which is that you are, I think, going to be able to use these tools to build something cool. The question would be, why would you do that to build your own ERP or your own accounts payable system? I'd much rather see you apply your cutting edge investment in AI towards something that no one else has.
Mm-hmm.
Like, and for now, off the shelf SaaS ERP, like the current versions, it's pretty good, man. I mean, that's not your grandpappy's ERP software. That's pretty good software with a lot of built-in AI features, by the way. How well some of those work, we could talk about. But the point is, you're getting some AI in the context of that SaaS ERP as it is. So for me right now, I want to hear customers talking about if they're going to build software and stuff with AI, I want to hear them talk about how they're going to build someone no one else has. Like, right. Why would you build new ERP? I do think ultimately, and Brian Summer, my colleague and my co-host of my monthly show, Brian talks a lot about rethinking processes. So does Phil Wainwright on my site, and I think that's a fundamentally correct that this modernization exercise will involve new processes. But I would say let those emerge over time, because for now, accounts payable is accounts payable. Like, you're not going to I'm sorry, but you're not going to reinvent accounts payable or double entry accounting. It's been around for a long time. Right. I don't remember when double entry accounting was invented, but it was hundreds of years ago, right? So come on, man. So we have to understand a little bit like the limits of that. But anyhow, just real quick, before you respond to that, Clive was saying you're talking the massive pain point. That was back when you were talking about customer anger and the challenges, and I think you pretty much nailed that. So I don't know. What do you think about all that, Eric?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's plenty of ERP systems out there. I almost feel like the last thing the world needs is another ERP vendor, but who knows? Maybe there's something I'm not thinking of that someone else has in mind. But you're right. I mean, if we're trying to recreate the wheel, why not focus on some of these outlying areas? So the areas that ERP is generally not good at, whether it's like you said earlier, it's an industry vertical function or a functional area that ERP is not good at, like PLM or forecasting. There's all these different areas that ERP is just generally not good at. So, okay, if you want to build something for that makes sense. But as far as like a full-blown ERP, the world's got plenty of those, unfortunately. And I apologize to anyone who's listening that might be thinking about an ERP startup. But
yeah, and I think it's really interesting to think about working backwards and saying, start with a key persona like a customer or a key supplier or even your best employee, and say, how are we serving that persona well, and how are we not? Where's our weakness? And then work your way back from there and figure out where the weak points are and how they're going to get addressed, and how can we serve those in ways that our competitors can't, right? Like, what are do we have some unique assets that we can deploy around those things, whether it's products or services or transitioning to new business models? Like, to me, like it starts with that. It's like, where is the pain and where is the opportunity with those key personas? And then walk back from that and figure out which components work off the shelf, which ones don't. How do you fill the process gaps? How do you rethink them and all of that stuff? And to me, those are the wonderful conversations. And as much as vendors are still talking about the next big thing, Eric, I think the cool thing about today is that the technology is generally good enough to do a lot of the things you want to do. Like, okay, there's some things that you're still waiting on, but for the most part, you're not waiting on quantum computing to do this shit, man. I mean, okay, quantum computing can probably do better supply planning, scenario planning than you can do right now someday. But at the moment, you can do a lot of stuff now. So let's go do that. Like,
Right.
This is what bothers me so much about a lot of the hype right now is it's deflecting away from the fact that the technology is good enough that you should be doing really well. But like you alluded to, so many companies aren't.
Yeah.
Why not?
Yeah. It's
You
like
know?
AP is so simple. Accounting is so simple. It's not that complicated, but yet somehow companies find ways to screw up an implementation that's just basic stuff like that. They're not even getting into all the advanced stuff. They're just trying to figure out how do we get our, chart of accounts and our reporting and all that stuff, the data migrated over. I mean, it's a cluster trying to get all that to work. And I don't have, I think it's I don't know what it is about our industry that drives me crazy, but it's just sort of like organizational memory is very low. Like companies keep doing the same things over and over, wondering why they keep failing. They think, well, we've got AI now. We've got all these advanced technologies, cloud, analytics. How could we possibly be failing? Well, because you're implementing the same way you were back in the 90s when you were still failing back then. So, the organizations don't seem to learn. I'm not in when I say organizations, I don't just mean the implementing customers. I also mean like the big consulting firms too. They tend to have the same antiquated approaches to how they deploy technology.
So Jason, Clive, and Tony, I'm going to wrap the show in the next 5-10 minutes. So please get your final comments in. And in particular, Clive, you and I have had extensive debates on this topic. So what did we miss that we need to hit on? Please get that into the chat. And just real quick on the project failures point, Eric, like you wrote about a project failure in your blog like not that long ago. And I remember reading it and thinking like, this is the same old shit, man. I mean,
I know. I could have written that same blog back in 95 and it would have
It's not even like we're failing in new ways. We're failing
No.
in the same ways. Like,
Yeah. Like, oh shit, you mean change management is important? I thought with all this new technology, change management wouldn't be a big deal. With AI, why is change management a big deal? It's like it's just like Groundhog Day, that Bill Murray movie where it's just like we keep repeating the same things.
Jason says customers could inadvertently miss out on AI benefits if they opt to override standard automations. Well, that is true. And there's more than one vendor that has explicitly said, like, if you're not on the latest releases, like you're not going to get the AI stuff first. Like you might get it eventually, but and part of that is that they need to be able to deploy at scale to prove there's a lot of pressure on these vendors to prove this technology delivers because it's not cheap. And there's a reason why they're saying these things is they need to deploy it at scale to show the benefits across their customer base. And so yeah, this is part of the dilemma right now, Jason. And the standardization, I think a big part of that is data standardization, which is a really core component to getting more out of AI from a structured data standpoint. With unstructured data, it's a little bit different. Clive says, many lawsuits at ERP software vendors stem from customization promises made during the sales cycle. Buyers should be very wary of promises. Good vendors don't offer promises. They offer alternatives to avoid disruptive customization. Yeah, can we get a thumbs up on that?
Yeah, it's very true. It's a great point.
And by the way, Eric has served as an expert witness in a number of these situations. So you've seen it.
It's like we were saying, it's like a flashback to the 90s. It's like, really, is this a modern day failure? Because I feel like we were talking about this decades ago and we're still talking about the same mistakes.
So while we get the final comments from our chat, and thanks guys for these excellent questions, Eric, let's revisit this final point on how customers can change, like from this angle, which is, let's say that a customer has really thought through this as we have been suggesting, and let's say they get for them a really good mix of the platform, the customization, they choose good vendors and they kind of have a good plan. Maybe it'll take them a few years to sort a lot of this stuff, but they have a good plan. Like, what do you think is sort of the next challenge for them? Like, they've made some good decisions around all of this, but is it the change? Is it governance? Like what would be next that they would need to overcome?
Yeah, it's change, governance, just the overall program management. It's also going to be the competing factions, especially from the vendors that are telling you you're doing it wrong, because you're not all in on if I'm an ERP vendor and I see you doing custom dev, or I see you investing in this other platform over here or whatever, I'm going to probably tell you that's wrong. You shouldn't be doing that. You should just be putting all your money and all your eggs in one basket over here on my off-the-shelf solution. So you just have to be confident in your decisions. No, assuming you made a good decision and you do feel confident, stay with it. And because I think vendors will try to convince you otherwise. And even some people within your own organization, that's a change management issue. They're going to push back and say, see, I knew we should have done more custom dev, or I knew we should have gone best of breed or whatever the minute something goes wrong. So yeah, it's all the usual. Honestly, the mix doesn't matter, honestly, as much as it is just making sure you're all on the same page and you know why you chose that mix. And then once you get into the implementation, it's all the usual stuff that's going to be important no matter what your mix is. It's the governance, the change management, program management, the process optimization, all that stuff.
Yeah, as you were talking, it kind of made me think back to some of the more successful stories I've seen. And I think for that ERP, like, or whatever big software you invest in, it could be a CRM too. Like, it seems like there's a premium on someone who can manage that relationship inside your company, maybe also in your services partner too. But that thing you described of like, okay, we still want a good relationship with our main vendors, like our ERP vendor, so they will take our feedback on product suggestions and renegotiate license terms and things like that. But we also need to be able to have some tough love in there, right? Like, here, we're gonna build our own track and trace solution instead of using yours, and here's why, right? Because that would be, I think, a good example of maybe where you might have some track and trace issues that a vendor doesn't support right now. Okay, so there's some tough love there, but you need that good relationship, and you especially need it because you need to have first dibs on those roadmap details, right? Because nothing hurts more in custom dev than building something that your main vendor rolls out the next year.
Yeah.
And so it strikes me, Eric, that one of the most important skills must be to maintain that good relationship, but not in that sort of friendly way of like, oh, we're doing business, but in that confidential way of like, here's where we're going to deviate from you, but we're still going to invest in you. And we need that intel from you on stuff you're planning. Like, that's all important, right?
Oh yeah. Yeah, for sure. And that's why, in my opinion, knowing that, take this with a grain of salt, because I am the CEO of a tech agnostic digital transformation firm. But I think having that independent tech agnostic advisor all the way through the life cycle is important for that reason, because you need someone that represents you, not the software vendor. If I rely on the SI or the tech consultants to manage the project for me, it's going to turn into a focus on whatever product they sell. And especially if you're doing this hybrid approach, you need someone that can pull together all the pieces and look at the entire picture and help you through that process.
Indeed. And that takes political skills also. And we could spend a whole show on, and we have before, honestly, on this whole independent aspect, but to facilitate that, right? Because when you introduce an expert advisor into the process, the vendor isn't going to throw you a party.
Right.
They're not going to be
super excited about it.
But the thing is, if you establish the rules of the road, that here's my independent advisor, and they're always a part of these discussions, then the new vendors you take on, that's just how you do things. And they get used to that because you're just there, right? And so I just think that that's one of the most important skills you could have, is how to facilitate and manage all of that politically. I think is really key, because it is politically in some ways more complicated, but I think the result is so much better that it's worth working on. Jason says, I support your earlier comments. Low code, no code has a more sustainable customization future versus traditional dev heavy pro code. And Eric, I think that's a big reason why you wrote this post, is because, like, I think it's really important post, because you're kind of saying that all the accumulated experience around this topic is kind of wrong in some ways. We need to take a fresh look at this now, because with a different set of tools, we can think about this differently.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
think that's really important.
Absolutely. And it just opens up so many options, which is good and bad. You know, it's overwhelming to some customers and clients of ours, but it's good. It's good to have these options. It's just harder to navigate.
Yep, and Clive on AI and being model driven, which naturally separates SAS code from customization with data. And AI probably got short shrift in the show compared to what we could have done on the topic, but I still think we're in a phase with AI where a lot of the fundamental choices we're talking about here are all about how you set yourself up for better AI.
Yeah.
And so, you know, in a way, this conversation is all about that, because AI is kind of what's forcing the urgency behind these discussions. Mm-hmm. So I would say that that's the more important aspect of AI right now, is that it's forcing these discussions rather than that it's the key ingredient to making all of these things happen, because there's still a lot of, you know, mixed opinions on how much the current AI tooling can help you, like with this process. Some developers swear by it and talk about massive efficiency gains, but I just saw the Airbnb CEO say that he's seen no differentiated impact yet in their development process. And, you know, that's significant comment from a CEO that's talking to other next gen CEOs. So the point is, there's a lot still to be worked out there, but I'm ultimately optimistic about AI and coding for the reasons I described, which is that the quality checks around code, I think, can be automated to a large extent. So I'm just saying that for now, I think the main way AI factors into the discussion is by forcing the whole discussion in the first place.
Yeah.
Because that's why we're having it, is because we're aware that if we don't have this stuff right, then our AI is dead on arrival. So
yeah, totally agree.
Last words, Eric. Thank you for joining. That was awesome.
Yeah, thank you. My last words are keep an open mind, look objectively at your options, and find the right recipe.
See, that's what you get when you write a post, man. You get the punishment of having to come on and defend it.
Defend your thoughts, yeah. With a tough crowd here today, this Friday.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I would say that, you know, these guys, they know their stuff, so it was great to have such informed comments.
Yeah, great.
Jason, you'll be the last one. As customization differentiators, always good to consider EBITDA and experiences from customers, partners, suppliers, employees, and other key stakeholders. And that, Jason, goes back to kind of the beginning of the discussion, which is, I think, ultimately you're choosing ecosystems and communities, not just vendors, and this factors into all of that. And when I go to an event and I see everyone like in a dynamic way supporting each other, that makes me happy. But, you know, a lot of events, I don't see that. I'll go to the exhibition hall and I'll see a bunch of tired ass partners, the same names, the same cheesy stuffed animal giveaways, and like, what are we doing here? So anyway,
yeah,
we shall see. Eric, I hope I see you on the road. We'll have another talk around where we're going to overlap, because I know you're going to a few shows this year. So
yeah, trying to go as many as I can, and look forward to seeing you at some of these.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, folks. Well, thanks for peppering us with comments, and hope you have a good day. Catch you later.
Thanks. Have a good one.